ॐ शुक्लां भरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। अगजानन पद्मार्कं गजाननमहर्निशम् अनेकदन्तं भक्तानामेकदन्तमुपास्महे। श्रीमहागणपतये नमः। गुरवे सर्वलोकानां भिषजे भवरोगिणां निधये सर्वविद्यानां श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। अस्मद्गुरुचरणारविन्दाभ्यां नमः। वसुदेवसुतं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुं। ज्ञानानन्दमयं देवं निर्मलस्फटिकाकृतिम् आधारं सर्वविद्यानां श्रीहयग्रीवमुपास्महे। श्रीहयग्रीवमूर्तये नमः। सरस्वती नमस्तुभ्यं वरदे कामरूपिणि विद्यारम्भं करिष्यामि सिद्धिर्भवतु मे सदा। श्रीमहासरस्वत्यै नमः। उमाकोमलहस्ताब्जसम्भावितललाटकं हिरण्यकुण्डलं वन्दे कुमारं पुष्करस्रजं। வெற்றிவேல் முருகனுக்கு ஹரஹரோஹரா. லோகவீரியம் மகாபூஜ்யம் சர்வரக்ஷாகரம் விபும் பார்வதி ஹிருதயானந்தம் சாஸ்தாரம் பிரணமாம்யகம். சுவாமியே சரணமையப்பா. வாகர்த்தாவிவ சம்பிரக்தௌ வாகர்த்த பிரதிபத்தயே ஜகதः பிதரௌ வந்தே பார்வதி பரமேஸ்வரौ. ஸ்ரீ பார்வதி பரமேஸ்வராभ्यां நமः. कोमलं कूजयन् वेणुं श्यामलोऽयं कुमारकः वेदवेद्यं परब्रह्मा तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। अस्मद्गुरुचरणारविन्दाभ्यां नमः। श्रीकृष्ण गोविन्द हरे मुरारे श्रीनाथ नारायण वासुदेव। श्रीकृष्ण गोविन्द हरे मुरारे श्रीनाथ नारायण वासुदेव। श्रीकृष्ण गोविन्द हरे मुरारे श्रीनाथ नारायण वासुदेव। पीताम्बरं करविराजितचक्रशङ्खकौमोदकी सरसिजं करुणासमुद्रं राधासहायम् अतिसुन्दरमन्दहासं वातालयेशम् अनिशं हृदि भावयामि। कृष्णो रक्षतु मां चराचर गुरुः कृष्णं नमस्ये सदा। कृष्णेनैव सुरक्षितोऽहमसकृत् कृष्णाय दत्तं मनः। कृष्णादेव समुद्भवो मम विभो कृष्णस्य दासोऽस्म्यहं। कृष्णे भक्तिरचञ्चलास्तु भगवन् हे कृष्ण तुभ्यं नमः। श्रीगुरुवायूरप्पा शरणं नम्राणां सन्निधत्ते सततमपि पुरस्तेरणभ्यर्थितानपि अर्थान् कामानजस्रं वितरति परमानन्दसान्द्रां गतिं च। इत्थं निःशेषलभ्यो निरवधिकफलः पारिजातो हरे त्वं क्षुद्रं तं शक्रवाटी ध्रुममभिलषति व्यर्थमर्त्यव्रजोऽयम्। श्रीगुरुवायूरप्पा शरणं श्रीभट्टपादम् अनिशं हृदि भावयामि। वंशी विभूषितकरात् नवनीरदाभात् पीताम्बरात् अरुणबिम्बफलादरोष्टात् पूर्णेन्दुसुन्दरमुखात् अरविन्दनेत्रात् कृष्णात् परं किमपि तत्त्वमहं न जाने। കൈരണ്ടും കൂപ്പി ഞാൻ വിണ്ടൂമീറക്കുന്നു നീരജലോചന നിന്നോടായി. ഇതീനു മഞ്ഞനെ കുമ്പിടേണ്ടാത്തോരു പ്രീതിയിൽ നീ എന്നെ പാലിക്കനായി. കൃഷ്ണ ഹരേ ജയ കൃഷ്ണ ഹരേ ജയ കൃഷ്ണ ഹരേ ജയ കൃഷ്ണ ഹരേ. Good evening, everyone. Okay, so we'll do, I think, quick review of 46 and 47, right? Vikram, can you do one? And then Vijaya, can you do one?
Yes, Rajesh. I can do 46.
Okay, sir.
Shri Krishnaya Parabrahmane Namaha. Ayi Deva Pura Kila Tvayi Swayamuttanashaye Stanandhaye Parijrambhanato Vyapavrate Vadane Vishwamachashta Vallavi Punarapyatha Bhalakai Samam Tvayi Leela Nirate Jagatpate Palasanjaya Vanchana Krudha Tava mridbhojanamūchurarbhakaha Aite pralayavadhau vibho Shitito yadi samasta bhakshinaha Mridupashanato ruja bhavet Iti bhita janani chukopasa Ayi durvinayatmakatvaya Kimumritsa bhatavatsa bhakshita Iti matra giram chiram vibho Vitatham tvam pratijagnishe hasan Aite sakalair vinishchite Vimatischid vadanam vidaryata Iti matra vibhatsito mukham Vikasat padmanibham vyadarayah Api mrillavadarshanot Jananim tam bahutarpayanniva Prithivim dikhilana kevalam Bhuvanam yapyakhilanya didrishaha
Didrishaha. Last.
Didrishaha Kuhachidvanamam buddhi kvachitam Kvachidabhram kuhachidrasatalam Manujadanuja kvachit suraha Dadrishe kim natadatvadhanani Kalasham buddhishayinam punaha Paravaikunఠa padadhivasinam Swapurascha nijarbhakatmakam Katidhatvam nadadarsha samukhe Vikasad bhuvane mukhodare Nano bhuyopi tatha vidhananah Anaya sputhamikshito bhavan Anavastham jagatam batatanot Dhritatattvadhiyam tadakshanam Jananim tam pranayena mohayan Stanamam badishetyupasajan Bhagavan madbhuta bala pahimam Shri Krishnaya Parabrahmane Namaha.
Ulokala Pandavarnanam Ekata Tadi Vimadhakarinim Madaram Samupasati Van Bhavan Stadanyalolupadaya Nivarayan Ankametya Bhavivan Payodarao.
Vijay, and the third line, first word, stanya.
Oh, stanya, sorry. Stanya lolu padaya nivarayan ankametya pavivan payodarao artapida kucha kutmale tvayi snikta hasa madurana nambuje duktamesha tahane parisrutam Tartumasu janani jagamate Sami pida rasapanga sankata Krodha para paripuda setasa Mandatandam ubakruhya paditam Anta deva tadipajanam tvaya.
The tune, because the first the two lines are together, right? So that anyway, that's okay. Keep.
Okay, yeah, tapani. Uccalatvani nidham
Tvanitam.
Uccalatvanitam uccakaistada sanni samya janani samatrutam tvatyaso visaravat tadarshasa satya eva tadi vishrudam shidau वेदमार्गपरिमार्गितं वृषा त्वामवीक्ष्य परिमार्गयन्तसौ सन्तदर्श सुकृदीन् युलुकले तीयमान नवनीतमोदवे sorry I'm tune
That's okay. Keep it.
त्वां प्रकृत्य पीदि पावना आसुरानन सरोजमासुसा रोष ऋषीतमुखी सखी पुरो பந்தனாய ரசனாம் உபாததே.
Vijay, and the tune நீங்க அந்த sa when you're ending the second line, you're ending it like the first line, right? So it goes त्वां प्रगृह्य बत भीति भावना भासुरानन sarojamaashusa. It goes that way, right? Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. बन्धुमिच्छति यमेव सञ्जनस्थं भवन्तमयि बन्धुमिच्छति सानियुज्य रसनागुणान् बहून् त्वयङ्कुलो न मखिलं किलैषत विस्मितोत्स्मित सखी जनेक्षितां स्विन्नसन्न वभुषं निरीक्ष्यतां नित्यमुक्त वभुरप्यहो हरे पन्दमेव कृपयान् मन्यताः स्थीयतां चिरम् उलूकले कलेत्यागता पवनमेव सायता प्राकुलोकलपिलान्तरे तदा सर्पिरर्पितवदन्न वास्तिताः यत्यपासु सुखमो विभो भवान् संयुध किमु सभासयानया एवमादि द्विजैर् अभिष्टुतो वादनाद परिपाहि मां कदात्.
The third line evamadi divijair abhishtuto divijair.
Okay. Evamadi divijair abhishtuto vad. And that's like pause.
Comma. After that, there's a comma. Abhishtuto comma irukanga.
Abhishtuto vadanada paripahi mam kadat.
Very good. Sudha or Kannan, are you on? Are you as Hari Arvind there?
Namaskar, Ramesh.
Kannan, one of you can be a student, or how is the connection?
Yeah. I can be a student. I can be a student.
Okay. You and Purna, you can be a student for 48. Okay. What do you call? Sudha and Kannan are joining from Sri Rangam today. So.
Wow.
So 48. Yamalarjuna Bhanjana Varnanam. That's the name of the chapter. Yamalarjuna Bhanjana Varnanam. Stanza 1. Muda suraughaistvamudara sammadhaihi udirya damodarayithyabhishtutah mridudara swairamulukhale laganne adurato dhvauka kubhavudaikshatah. So first time Bhattaripad is introducing the word Dhamodara, right? Because Dhama means rope, Udara means stomach. So you're now tied with the rope around his stomach. So now he can be called Damodara because that's what happened in the 47th chapter, right? So like we saw last time, right? Yashoda tied him to the mortar and then she just goes away. So at the time, like in India, they have this identification for a house. They say you go like this and then you'll see that store. And then the house next to that store is that house. So similarly, Nandagopal's house also had an identification. For a long time, unknown to these people, for several years, there were two really large trees. So Arjuna means big, right? Yamala Arjuna means a Yamala type of trees. Two really big trees were outside their compound. And that's the identification. The house with the two big Yamala Arjuna trees is Nandagopal's house. So those trees have been there for a really long time. So when, everybody is like wondering, how is this, like we saw last time, all the sages are like, how did Yashoda manage to tie Krishna up? So as they're all watching, Krishna is now looking that from where he's standing, he's able to see these two trees in their compound. And then what he does is he decides to walk towards those trees which are not very far away. So muda suraugais tvam udara sammadaihi. So put a visarga there and a comma. Sammadaihi, comma. Next line, the ru becomes a u. Udirya damodara ityabhishtutaha mridudaraha. Put a is mridudaras swairam ulukhale lagan. Put a in at the end of that line and a comma. Next line, if you have an in and a big na, strike both. Put a adhurato dvau kakubabu dhaikshataha. Muda suraughaistvamudara sammadhaihi udirya damodara ityabhishtutaha mridudara swairamulukhale lagan adhurato dvau kakubabu dhaikshataha.
Muda suraugai swamudara sammadaihi udirya damodara ityabhishtutaha mridudara swara mukukale laganna mulukale laganna adurato dvau kakuba udaikshataha.
The third line kind of swairam ulukhale. Mridudara swairam ulukale.
Mridudara swairam mulukale.
Yeah.
Muda suraugai swamudara sammadaihi udirya damodara ityabhishtutaha mridudara swaira mulukale laganna adurato dvau kakuba udaikshataha.
Muda suraughaistvamudara sammadaihi udirya damodara ityabhishtutaha mridudara swaira mulukhale lagan adurato dvau kakubhavu daikshataha. Muda suraughaistvamudara sammadaihi udirya damodara ityabhishtutaha mridudara swaira mulukhale lagan adurato dvau kakubhavu daikshataha.
Kubera sunor nalakubara bhidaha paro manigriva iti pratham ghataha mahesha sevadhigata shriyonmadhau chiram kila twadvimukha vakhelatam. So now there's a flashback story happening, right? So the Kubera had two sons, like it says here, Nala Kubara is one name, Manigriva is the other name. That's what is coming in first stanza and second stanza. So second line. So these two, so Lord Shiva, right, as it says in the third line, right, like Mahesha. So like Lord Shiva is Ashutoshi, right? You can easily please. So everybody worships Shiva because you can easily please him, and then he gives you what you want. So these two children of Kubera also worshipped Shiva, and then Kubera itself is rich, and then they also got more wealth and more power and everything. And like with anything, the moment you get more power and more wealth, you then start going into bad ways. So that's what is happening, that previously they were very religious and dedicated, but once they got all the blessings and the boon they wanted, they started leading a very wayward life and then became very proud and haughty, right? That's what essentially they become. And then they become indifferent to all the religious things and everything. Kubera sunur nalakubara bhidaha, comma, paro manigriva iti pratham gataha mahesha sevadi ghata Shriyon Madau, comma, Chiram Kila Tvad Vimukhava Khelatam. Kubera Sunur Nalakubara Bhidahan Paro Manigriva iti Pratham Gataha Mahesha Sevadhigata Shriyon Madau Chiram Kila Tvad Vimukhava Khelatam.
Kubera sunur nala kubara sunur nala Kubarabidah Paro Manikriva iti pratam gatah Mahesha Sevadigata Shiyon Mado Chiram Kilat Tvad Vimukava Kelatan Kubera Sunu Nala Kubera Sunu Nala Kubarat Bidaha Paro Manikriva iti pratam gatah Mahesha Sevadigata Shriyon Mado Chiram Kilat Tvad Kelatam
कुबेरसूनुर्नलकूबराभिदः परो मणिग्रीव इति प्रथां गतः महेशसेवाधिगतश्रियोन्मदौ चिरं किल त्वद्विमुखावखेलताम् कुबेरसूनुर्नलकूबराभिदः परो मणिग्रीव इति प्रथां गतः महेशसेवाधिगतश्रियोन्मदौ चिरं किल त्वद्विमुखावखेलताम्
सुरापगायां किल तौ मदोत्कटौ सुरापगायद्बहुयौवतावृतौ विवाससौ केलिपरौ स नारदो भवत्पदैकप्रवणो निरैक्षत. So one day, what happens is this Nalakubara and Manigriva. So they are then having fun, right? So they are there with a lot of other women, and they are all drunk. And then they were not wearing any clothes, and then they were playing in the Ganges. So first of all, and this will come up in a couple of chapters, even the chapter where Krishna steals the clothes of women, right? So even in that chapter also, this indication is you should never take bath in a river completely naked. You should always wear some clothes when you're taking bath. This also happens later on also for one other person. But anyway, so here, so they're taking bath, they're playing, right? And that too, they're playing in the Ganges, which it says is Surapagaya, which is like the river of the gods, right? So they're intoxicated, they're all playing there with the women, and they're all drunk. So at that time, Narada happens to come there, and it says Narada, who's Bhavat Padayaka, he's completely devoted only to you. So when he comes, they just look at him, they roll their eyes and they ignore, and then they continue to do what they are doing in the water right now. And then they were singing and all that, and they're all just enjoying in the water. Surapagayam kila tau Madotkatau, Surapa Gayat Bahu Yauvatavritau Vivasasau Keli Parau Sanarado, Bhavat Padaika Pravano Nirakshata. Surapagayam Kilatau Madotkatau Surapagayat Bahu Yauvatavritau Vivasasau Keli Parau Sanarado Bhavat Padaika Pravano Nirakshata.
Surapagayam kilato madotkadau Surapagayat bahuyau vrutavritau Vivasasau keli paro sanarado Bhavat Padaika Pravano Nirakshata. Surapagayam kilato madotkadau Surapagayat bahuyau vrutavritau Vivasasau keli paro sanarado Bhavat Padaika Pravano Nirakshata.
Surapagayam kilatau madotkatau Surapagayad bahuyavatavrutau Vivasasau keliparau satnarado Bhavat Padaika Pravano Nirakshata. Surapagayam kilatau madotkatau Surapagayad bahuyavatavrutau Vivasasau keliparau sanarado Bhavat Padaika Pravano Nirakshata.
That's a 4. Bhiya priya lokamupatavasasam puro nirikshapi madandhachetasau imau bhavat bhaktyupashanti siddhaye munir jagau shanti mrite kutas sukham. So when Narada comes there, the women who were first there, so they realize that some big person has come, and they realize that they made a mistake. So they immediately cover themselves with clothes and they run away from that scene. But this Manigriva and Nalakubara and Manigriva who are there, they continue to ignore, right, and say like we are famous, we are rich, so who are you to come and so they continue to ignore. So at that time, so Narada says, what, you all were once very devoted right? You done a lot of worship to Shiva and everything. So number one, you lost the devotion. And second, to get happiness, you are now committing sinful activities like whatever they were doing. And that is happening because you do not have a calmness of mind. So he says, so to get you back into the state of devotion and also to get your mind into a state of calmness, he then says, that comes in the next stanza. So here, Bhattacharya then in the end, he says, Shanti Mrite Kuta Sukham. So he says, how can someone have happiness if they do not have calmness of mind and that control of mind, which none of these people were having, because they were then continuing to ignore Narada and doing all this. Bhiya Priyalokam Upata Vasasam, Puro Nirikshapi Madhandha Chetasau. So Madhanda, Anda means blinded. So they're blinded with intoxication. Madhanda Chetasau. Imau Bhavat Bhaktyupa Shanti Siddhaye, Munir Jagau Shanti Mrite Kutaha, Putta is Kutas Sukham. Bhiya Priya Lokamupatavasasam Puro Nirikshapi Madandha Chetasau. Imau Bhavat Bhaktyupashanti Siddhaye Munir Jagau Shanti Mrite Kutas Sukham.
Biya Priya Lokamupatavasasam Puro Nirikshapi Madhanda Chetaso Imo Bhavat Bhaktyupashanti Siddhaye Munir Jago Shanti Mrite Kutasukam. Biya Priya Lokamupatavasasam Puro Nirikshapi Madhanda Chetaso Imo Bhavat Bhaktyupashanti Siddhaye Munir Jago Shanti Mrite Kutasukam.
Bhiya Priya Lokamupatavasasam Puro Nirikshapi Madandha Chetasau Imau Bhavat Bhaktyupashanti Siddhaye Munirjagau Shanti Mrite Kutassukham. Bhiya Priya Lokamupatavasasam Puro Nirikshapi Madandha Chetasau Imau Bhavat Bhaktyupashanti Siddhaye Munirjagau Shanti Mrite Kutassukham.
Sounds fine. Yuvam avaptau kakubhatmatam chiram harim nirikshata padam swamapnutam iti ritau thau bhavadikshana spriham gatau prajante kakubhau babhuvatuh. So of course, Narada comes, he gives him a pretty strong advice. He says, there are certain things which you have to be very blessed with. He says, one is, getting money itself, you have to be blessed because otherwise you have to go through a lot of suffering. So he says, not bad, but then getting money or, having good intelligence, looking good, looking beautiful, being born in a nice family, all of these are great, but then all of these can also make you very proud. And especially in that, he says, getting more money makes you the worst, because now you feel that you can control everything. And this is happening thousands and thousands of years back. So I think it still holds true, right? Getting more money, he says, makes you do bad things. And he says, and he gives a couple of examples. He says, for example, a person who has a lot of money will not understand the sufferings a person who is completely poor has. The only way he can realize that is by becoming a poor person and then living that life. And the other example he gives is, if somebody pricks me with a pin, and then I'm showing an expression in my face and Vikram is looking at me, he won't understand the pain I'm going through just my facial expression. Unless I prick him with a pin, he won't know the pain I'm going through, right? So similarly, Narada says, so all of this is repentance that you need to go through, is you have to realize the problem of it. And says here, you have done a couple of things. You've been stark naked, number one. Two, you lost control of your mind. You lost your consciousness itself. So he says, so then the best way for you is to go and be born as trees, because trees are stark naked. Trees don't cover themselves. They're naked. And then they're just absolutely just standing still. So I think Tamil maram mari nikkaran, they say in Tamil, right? Like you can say whatever you want, that person never gets bothered, because as if they have no consciousness. They're just standing there. So he says, so you both are going to be born as trees. And then then Mani Kubra, Nala Kubra, Manikriva apologizes. He says, however, because of all the good deeds you have done, you will remember these things that you have done, because that's another very important thing, right? You take up a punishment, but you don't remember why you got a punishment. You'll continue making the sins. He said the good thing for you is you'll remember what you have done. and you have to repent it for thousands of years. And finally, because of the good things, you will meet Hari himself. So that's why it says here, Harim Nirikshata. Hari himself is going to be coming. And then when he comes, you will then get the blessings and then you will then be released. Narada then gives them that punishment. At the same time, he also gives them the opportunity to come out of it, saying that once you repent, then a time will come and Hari will come and release you. So, Yuvama Vaptau Kaku Bhatmatam Chiram, Harim Nirikshyata Padam Swamapnutam Itiritau Thau Bhavadikshana Spriham, Gatau Brajante Kakubhau Bhabuvatuhu. So Braja is referring to the Gokulam or Vrindavan, all those places. So they then go to Brajante, they go to the land of Brajabhumi, and then they become these two Kakuba trees. So those are the two trees which was there in Krishna's compound. Yuvam avaptau kakubhatmatam chiram harim nirikshyata padam swamapnutam itiritau thau bhavadikshana spriham gatau vrajante kakubhau bhabuvatuhu.
Yuvam avaptau kakubhatmatam chiram harim nirikshyata padam swamapnutam iti iritau tau bhavadikshana spriham gato vrajante kakubhau bhabuvatuhu. Yuvam avaptau kakubhatmatam chiram harim nirikshyata padam swamapnutam iti iritau tau bhavadikshana spriham gato vrajante kakubhau bhabuvatuhu.
Yuvam avaptau kakubhatmatam chiram harim nirikshyata padam swamapnutam iti ritau tau bhavadikshana spruham gatau vrajante kakubhau bhabuvatuhu. Yuvam avaptau kakubhatmatam chiram harim nirikshyata padam swamapnutam iti ritau tau bhavadikshana spruham gatau vrajante kakubhau babhuvatuhu.
Stanza 6. Atandramindra druyugam tatha vidham samhe yushamantargamina tvaya tirayuto lukhala nirdhutau chiraya jirnau paripatitau taru. So then Krishna then walks, right? He's like 3-4 years or whatever. So he's now dragging that mortar, and then he walks towards the trees. And then he goes to the middle of these trees, and then the mortar gets stuck between those two trees. And then with his force, he just continues to move forward, and both the trees completely get uprooted, and then they fall on the ground. And because they're really big trees, of course, when they fall on the ground, they create a big thumping noise, and then it crushes everything else which is around it, and both the trees now break. Atandram Indra Druyugam Tatha Vidham, Sameyusha Manthara Gamina Tvaya. Sorry, I forgot to say one other important thing. So the reason also is like, because Narada has said, right? So that is the thing we have to always remember, that Narada has said you were going to get freed. So that's what Krishna then had to do it. He was obligated to free these two people because Narada has said that. So Tira Yutho Lukala Rodha Nirdhutau, Shiraya Jirnau Paripatitau Taru. Atandramindra druyugam tatha vidham samhe yushamantharagamina tvaya tirayuto lukhala rodha nirdhutau chiraya jirnau paripatitau taru.
Atandramindra druyugam tatha vidham samhe yushamantharagamina tvaya Irayito lukala roda nirdutao Siraya jirno paripatito taru.
Okay, third line, nirdhutau, last word.
Nirdutau.
Yeah.
Atandramindra drayugam tatavidam sameyusha mantaragamina tvaya Irayito lukala roda nirdutau chiraya jirno paripatitau taru.
अतन्द्रमिन्द्रद्रुयुगं तथाविधं समेयुषा मन्थरगामिना त्वया तिरायितो लूखलरोधनिर्धुतौ चिराय जीर्णौ परिपातितौ तरु अतन्द्रमिन्द्रद्रुयुगं तथाविधं समेयुषा मन्थरगामिना त्वया तिरायितो लूखलरोधनिर्धुतौ चिराय जीर्णौ परिपातितौ तरु.
Census 7. अभाजिशाकिद्वितयं यथा त्वया तदैव तद्गर्भतलान् निरेयुषा महात्विषा यक्षयुगेन तत्क्षणात् अभाजि गोविन्द भवानपि स्तवैः. So then from the root or the core of those trees, at that point when the trees then fell, came out two yakshas, two people who were very, yakshas are a kind of a type of gods, right? Who are then very, they were shining, they were as if there was fire coming out of it. Two of them came up in that place, and then there was, and then lit up that whole place, and then they bowed to you and then said the following words to you, O Govinda. That comes in the next stanza. Abhaji Shakhi Dvitayam Yada Tvaya, Tadaiva Tat Garbha Talan Nireyusha Mahatvisha Yaksha Yugena Tat Kshanat. Put it at the end of that line. Tat Kshanat, next line the da becomes a. Abhaji Govinda Bhavanapi Stavaihi. Abhajishakidvitayam yada tvaya tadaiva tadgarbhatala nireyusha mahatvisha yaksha yugena tatkshanate abhaji govinda bhavanapi stavaihi.
Abhajishakidvitayam yada tvaya tadaiva tadgarbhatala nireyusha mahatvisha yaksha yugena takshanate Abhaji Govinda Bhavana Pistavaihi. Abhaji Shakidvitayam Yada Tvaya Tadaiva Tadgarbhatala Nireyusha Mahatvisha Yaksha Yugena Takshanat Abhaji Govinda Bhavana Pistavaihi.
Abhaji Shakidvitayam Yada Tvaya Abhaji Shakidvitayam Yada Tvaya Tadaiva Tadgarbhatalan Nireyusha Mahatvisha Yaksha Yugena Tatkshanat Abhaji Govinda Bhavana Pistavaihi. Abhaji Shakidvitayam Yada Tvaya Tadaiva Tadgarbhatalan Nireyusha Mahatvisha Yaksha Yugena Tatkshanat Abhaji Govinda Bhavana Pistavaihi.
Ihanya bhaktopi samishyati kramathe bhavantametau khalu rudra sevakau muni prasadat bhavadangrimagatau katau brhanau khalu bhakti muttamam. So now these two yakshas, Nalakubra and Manigriva say, what, we were big devotees of Shiva and everything. And then thankfully, because of Narada, we now had this great opportunity or blessings to be able to come and meet you. So he says, all we want is, we just want your blessings and we want complete devotion to you. That's the only thing. We've learned our lesson. And Krishna also says, right, whatever Narada gave you, you might think of it as a curse, but it was actually a blessing, because that actually you essentially went up in your consciousness, right? Because of that, you realized your mistakes, and then you came down from Swargaloka to this Bhumi to suffer this. Now you're able to go back, and then hopefully, you'll remain there, and I'm blessing you that you continue to be, continue to remain good and all that. So they bless, and then they both go back. Ihanya bhaktopi sameshyati kramathe bhavantam etau khalu rudra sevakau muni prasadat bhavadangrim agatau, gatau vrinanau khalu bhaktim uttamam. Ihanya bhaktopi sameshyati kramathe bhavantametau khalu rudra sevakau muni prasadat bhavadangrimagatau gatau vrinanau khalu bhaktim uttamam.
Ihanya bhaktopi sameshyati kramad bhavantametau khalu rudra sevakau मुनिप्रसादात् भवदङ्घ्रिमागतौ गतौ व्रणानो कलिभक्तिमुत्तमाम्
Khalu, last word, last line. Khalu.
खलु गतौ व्रणानो खलु भक्तिमुत्तमाम् इहान्य भक्तोऽपि समेष्यति क्रमाद भवन्तमेतौ खलु रुद्रसेवकौ मुनिप्रसादात् भवदङ्घ्रिमागतौ गतौ व्रणानो खलु भक्तिमुत्तमाम्
इहान्यभक्तोऽपि समेष्यति क्रमात् भवन्तमेतौ खलु रुद्रसेवकौ मुनिप्रसादात् भवदङ्घ्रिमागतौ गतौ वृणानौ खलु भक्तिमुत्तमाम् इहान्यभक्तोऽपि समेष्यति क्रमात् भवन्तमेतौ खलु रुद्रसेवकौ मुनिप्रसादात् भवदङ्घ्रिमागतौ गतौ वृणानौ खलु भक्तिमुत्तमाम्.
Answer 9. ततस्तरुद्धारणधारुणारव प्रकम्पि सम्पाति निगोपमण्डले विलज्जितत्वज्जननी मुखे क्षिणा व्यमोक्षिनन्देन भवान् विमोक्षदः. Of course, when such large two trees fall with a big thud of the noise, everybody now comes running, right? All the Nandas and the Gopikas who are the Gopas and the Gopikas who are there, they all come running. And then they all start wondering, how did these two trees, although these two trees had become old, they had become very old trees, but how did these two trees fall? What caused it? And then they also see that in between the two trees which have fallen, Krishna is still as a small baby standing there with the mortar. So they're even more confused. How did this boy go there? And how did he not get, hurt with the trees falling? Such two big trees have come and nothing has happened to this boy. So they're all very amazed. So they all go run and then they first release him from the mortar. And here Bhadrapad says, very nicely that Vilajjitatva Janani Mukeksha. So Nandagopa is then looking and then he stares towards Yashoda saying, what have you done? Right? You tied this poor boy in this mortar. How is it even the right thing to do? And then it says that because of that Tva Janani, your mother, who is feeling very ashamed of the mistake she's actually done, right? She said, I know I committed a big mistake by tying this boy. Of course, I never expected him to go there and the tree to fall and everything. But anyways, so they then release Krishna. And then, she says, you who releases everybody from bondage, they release you from the bondage to the mortar. So, tatas taru dharana darunarava. First is dharana, next is darunarava, and then put a plus. Prakampi Sampatini Gopa Mandale. So first two lines are together. Vilajjita Tvaj Janani Mukhekshina, comma, Vyamokshi Nandena Bhavan Vimokshadaha. Tatastaru Dharana Dharunarava Prakampi Sampatini Gopa Mandale Vilajjita Tvaj Janani Mukhekshina Vyamokshinandena Bhavan Vimokshadaha.
ततस्तरु दारुणारव प्रकम्पि सम्पातिनि गोपमण्डले विलज्जितत्वज्जननी मुखे क्षिणा व्यमोक्षिनन्देन भवान् विमोक्षदः. ततस्तरु दारुणारव प्रकम्पि सम्पातिनि गोपमण्डले विलज्जितत्वज्जननी मुखे क्षिणा यमोक्षिनन्देन भवान् विमोक्षदः.
ततस्तरुदारणदारुणारव प्रकम्पि सम्पातिनि गोपमण्डले विलज्जितत्वज्जननी मुखे क्षिणा व्यमोक्षिनन्देन भवान् विमोक्षदः. ततस्तरुदारणदारुणारव प्रकम्पि सम्पातिनि गोपमण्डले विलज्जितत्वज्जननी मुखे क्षिणा व्यमोक्षिनन्देन भवान् विमोक्षदः.
Mahiruhormadhyagato batarbhako Hareh Prabhavata Parikshatoधुना Iti Bruvanairgamito Griham Bhavan Marutpuradhishvara Pahimam Gadhat. So then all the people there who were like, it is really a wonder that the child who then got between these two trees and the trees actually fell, but nothing actually happened to the child. So it's indeed really a blessing that nothing happened to them. All of them started talking that way. So Marutpuradishwara, Lord of Guruvayur, Pahimam Gadat, please eradicate or save me from all the ailments. Mahiruhor Madhya Gato Batar Bhako, comma, Harehe is there, put a F, Haref Prabhavat Aparikshato. If you want to break it, you can break at the da, or you can say it together. Prabhavada Parikshato Dhuna Iti Bruvanair Gamito Griham Bhavan, comma, Marut Puradhishwara Pahi Mam Gadat. Mahi Ruhor Madhyagato Batar Bhako Haref Prabhavata Parikshato Dhuna Ite Bruvanair Gamito Griham Bhavan Marut Puradhishwara Pahi Mam Gadat.
Mahi Ruhor Madhyagato Batar Bhako Hare Prabhavat Parikshato Duna Iti Bruvanor Gamito Griham Bhavan Marut Puradhishwara Pahi Mam Gatat.
The third line, Kanan, Iti Bruvanair.
Iti Bruvaner Gamito Griham Bhavan Marut Puradhishwara Pahi Mam Gadat. Mahi Ruhor Madhyagato Batar Bhako Hare Prabhavat Parikshato Duna Iti Bruvanor Gamito Griham Bhavan Iti Bruvaner Gamito Griham Bhavan Marut Puradhishwara Pahi Mam Gadat.
Mahiruhor Madhyagato Batar Bhako Haref Prabhavada Parikshato Dhuna Iti Bruvanair Gamito Gruham Bhavan Marut Puradhishwara Pahi Mam Gadat. Mahiruhor Madhyagato Batar Bhako Haref Prabhavada Parikshato Dhuna Iti Bruvanair Gamito Gruham Bhavan Marut Puradhishwara Pahi Mam Gadat.
Shri Krishnaya Parabrahmane Namaha. That completes 48. So we'll go to 51 and yeah, go to 51 today. So let's see here. Tulsi, you can be a student, and Gopiji, you can be a student. Okay. So 51 is Aghasura Vadha Varnanam, but 51 and 52 actually are connected chapters. The story kind of continues between 51 and 52. So stanza 1. Kadachana Brajashishubhis Samham Bhavan Vanashane Vihita Matif Pragetaram Samhavruto Bahutara Vatsamandalaihi Sate Manai Niragamadisha Jemanaihi. So time passes, few things also happen in 49, 50, etc. So one day Krishna, then they decide, as boys, they said, okay, today we are going to go and we're going to leave early in the morning to go grazing, right? We're going to go to this forest, and then we are going to have a picnic, right, in the forest. So they decide early, and then in the morning, they pack all their things, and they pack the horn which they use to call people. It's called bugle. It's like the curved shaped one, the flute and sticks and everything. They gather all their calves, and then here it says Jemanaihi, with cooked food, right? So different types of cooked food, because they're leaving early in the morning and it has to last till the afternoon, right? So they pack all that, and then they decide to go to the forest for grazing. So typically after the 51st chapter, we do a Naivedhyam. Krishna is eating small amount of cooked food, but we typically do a Naivedhyam of all the mixed rice and everything after the 51st chapter. And that's when the half break comes in the Sampurna Narayaneeyam session, right? Is after 51, when Krishna goes to the picnic. So that's what is happening in stanza 1. So Kadachana Braja Shishubhihi is there, put a is Shishubhis Samam Bhavan, comma, Vanashane Vihita Matihi, put a F, Matif Pragetaram, Samavruto Bahutara Vatsa Mandalaihi, comma, Sate Manair Niragamadhisha Jemanaihi. Kadachana Brajashishubhis Samam Bhavan Vanashane Vihita Matif Pragetaram Samavruto Bahutara Vatsa Mandalaihi Sate Manair Niragamadisha Jemanaihi.
कदाचन व्रजशिशुभिः समं भवान् वनाशने विहितमतिः प्रगेतरां समावृतो बहुतरवत्समण्डलैः सते मनैर्निरगमदीशजेमनैः कदाचन व्रजशिशुभिः समं भवान् वनाशने विहितमतिः प्रगेतरां समावृतो बहुतरवत्समण्डलैः सते मनैर्निरगमदीश जेमनैः
कदाचन व्रज शिशुभिः समं भवान् वनाशने विहितमतिः प्रगेतरां समावृतो बहुतरवत्समण्डलैः सदेमनैर्निरगमदीशजेमनैः कदाचन व्रज शिशुभिः समं भवान् वनाशने विहितमतिः प्रगेतरां समावृतो बहुतरवत्समण्डलैः सते मनैर्निरगमदीशजेमनैः.
Answer 2. विनिर्यतस्तव चरणाम्बुजद्वयात् उदञ्चितं त्रिभुवनपावनं रजः महर्षयः पुलकदरैः कलेबरैः उदूहिरे धृतभवदीक्षणोत्सवाः. But is saying that, you know, some of the biggest of devotees, the biggest of sages, right, they go through the Ashtanga yoga of Nigama, Pranayama, all that, and they attain the highest level of Samadhi, they reach that point, but still they are not blessed even to get little bit of dust that touches your feet fall on them. However, the people of Brajabhumi, they're so blessed. They have not gone through all that Ashtanga yoga, but then they are just walking along with you, and then they're playing with you. The dust that comes from your feet is falling on them. So he says some of the sages realize that, and then as you're walking, they all come down to Vrindavan, and then they roll themselves there so that they can actually feel, you know, the dust from your feet fall on them, right? So I think I might have said this multiple times. Even when I went to Vrindavan, I saw people actually doing that Namaskaram everywhere and doing the parikrama of Vrindavan with just Namaskaram. I was sitting in an auto and going, and they were all doing Namaskaram. Like instead of doing step, they were doing Namaskaram and doing the parikrama of Vrindavan. They still do that there, right? So he says at that point, all the sages come there, and then they were, you know, they wanted to get the dust coming from your feet. Vinir yatas tava charanambhuja dvayat. Put it at the end of that line, comma. Then instead of du, it becomes u. Udanchitam tribhuvana pavanam rajaha. Maharshayaha, put a f. Maharshayah pulakadaraihi is there. Put a ich sound. Pulakadaraih kalebaraihi. Visarga again at the end of that line and comma. Kalebaraihi. Next line, the ru becomes u. Uduhire dhrita bhavadikshanotsavaha. Viniryatas tava charanambujadvayate udanchitam tribhuvanapāvanam rajah maharshayah pulakadaraih kalebaraihi uduhire dhrita bhavadikshanotsavaha.
विनिर्यतस्तव चरणाम्बुजद्वयात् उदञ्चितं त्रिभुवनपावनं रजः महर्षयः पुलकदरैः कलेबरैः उदूहिरे धृतभवदीक्षणोत्सवाः विनिर्यतस्तव चरणाम्बुजद्वयात् उदञ्चितं त्रिभुवनपावनं रजः महर्षयः पुलकदरैः कलेबरैः उदूहिरे धृतभवदीक्षणोत्सवाः.
विनिर्यतस्तव चरणाम्बुजद्वयात् उदञ्चितं त्रिभुवनपावनं रजः महर्षयः पुलकधरैः कलेबरैः उदूहिरे धृतभवदीक्षणोत्सवाः विनिर्यतस्तव चरणाम्बुजद्वयात् उदञ्चितं त्रिभुवनपावनं रजः महर्षयः पुलकधरैः कलेबरैः उदूहिरे धृतभवदीक्षणोत्सवाः.
Answer 3. प्रचार्ययत्य विरलशाद्वले तले पशून् विभो भवति समं कुमारकैः अघासुरो न्यरुणदघाय वर्तनीं भयानकः सपदि शयानकाकृतिः. So then there was this, so one more Kamsa's friend called Aghasura. So the Aghasura is sibling of Putana and Bakasura. So Putana we saw in the 40th chapter. I think Bakasura was the previous chapter or the chapter in between that, right? So they all come to destroy Krishna, they all die. So this Aghasura realized that and says, you know what, I have to somehow take revenge, right? And he says the best way to take revenge is not just to get rid of Krishna, but also to get rid of all of Krishna's friends. Because if I get rid of all of Krishna's friends, then even their parents also are going to be upset. That way I can destroy the entire the Vraja Bhumi, right? I can get rid of everybody. So he decides that. And so when these boys, they all go to picnic, they are all grazing in a place which is tall grass is formed there. So at that place, he comes in the form of a Shayana, a big, massive python. He then transforms himself into a big python, and then he's lying on the grass there. So, prachara yatya virala shadvale tale, pashun vibho bhavati samam kumarakaihi aghasuro nyaruna daghaya vartanim, bhayanakaha, putta is bhayanakas sapadi shayanakakritihi. प्रचारयत्य विरलशाद्वले तले पशून् विभो भवति समं कुमारकैः अघासुरो न्यरुणदघाय वर्तनीं भयानकः सपदि शयानकाकृतिः.
प्रचारयत्य विरलशाद्वले तले पशून् विभो भवति समं कुमारकैः अघासुरो न्यरुणदघाय वर्तनीं भयानकः सपदि शयानकाकृतिः. प्रचारयत्य विरलशाद्वले तले पशून् विभो भवति समं कुमारकैः अघासुरो न्यरुणदघाय वर्तनीं भयानकः सपदि शयानकाकृतिः.
प्रचारयत्य विरलशाद्वले तले पशून् विभो भवति समं कुमारकैः अघासुरो नरुणदघाय वर्तनीं भयानकः सपदि शयानकाकृतिः.
आकृतिः at the very end. आकृतिः.
शयानकाकृतिः. प्रचारयत्य विरलशाद्वले तले पशून् विभो भवति समं कुमारकैः अघासुरो नरुणदघाय वर्तनीं भयानकः सपदि शयानकाकृतिः.
महाचल प्रतिमतनोर्गुहानिभ प्रसारित प्रतित मुखस्य कानने मुखोदरं विहरन कौतुकाद्गताः कुमारकाः किमपि विदूरगे त्वयि. So then because he became such a big python that when he was lying on the ground and he had his mouth open, when the boys were grazing, they really thought this was some big mountain that they have actually come across. And then the mouth which was open, it felt like as if it was a cave. So they could not see the either ends of the snake or the tail of the snake. It was such a massive size that they didn't realize what was happening. They thought maybe this is some fancy place in Vrindavan which they have come, and this is a mountain, it's a cave, and they all decided to explore it by walking into the snake's mouth. Mahachala pratima tanur guha nibha, put a plus, prasarita pratita mukhasya kanane mukhodaram viharana kautukat gataha, kumarakaha, put a ich sound, kumarakah kimapi vidurage twai. Mahachala pratimatanor guha nibha prasarita pradita mukhasya kanane mukhodaram viharana kautukat gataha kumarakah kimapi vidurage twahi.
महाचल प्रतिमथ नोर्गु नोर्गुहानिभ प्रसारित प्रदितमुखस्य कानने मुखोदरं विहारन कौतुकागताः कुमारकाः किमपि विधूरगे त्वयि महाचलप्रतिमतः नोर्गुहानिभ प्रसारित प्रदितमुखस्य कानने मुखोदरं विहरन कौतुकागताः कुमारकाः किमपि विधूरगे त्वयि.
महाचलप्रतिमतनोर्गुहानिभ प्रसारित प्रदिधमुखस्य कानने मुखोदरं विहरण कौतुकाद्गताः कुमारकाः किमपि विदूरगे त्वयि महाचलप्रतिमतनोर्गुहानिभ प्रसारित प्रदिधमुखस्य कानने मुखोदरं विहरण कौतुकाद्गताः कुमारकाः किमपि विदूरगे त्वयि.
That's fine. प्रमादतः प्रविशति पन्नगोधरं क्वतत्तनौ पशुपकुले सवात्सखे विदन्निदं त्वमपि विवेशित प्रभो सुहृज्जनं विशरणमाशु रक्षितुम्. So the boys then enter and they keep walking into the snake's mouth, and as they start getting more and more, they start feeling the heat that's there inside. However, Aghasura doesn't close his mouth because he's waiting for Krishna to enter. And Krishna then knows what is happening, but then he waits. All the boys have now entered, and then he knows that these boys went in confidently only because they knew Krishna was there to support him. So then he decides, okay, now I'm going to go help. So Krishna also then enters into the mouth to help the boys out. So pramadataha is there, put a F. Pramadatah pravishati panna godaram, comma, kvatat tanau, kvatat tanau pashupa kule savatsake vidannidam tvamapi viveshita prabho, comma, suhrij janam visharanam ashu rakshitum. Pramadatah pravishati panna godaram क्वतत्तनौ पशुपकुले सवात्सके विदन्निदं त्वमपि विवेशित प्रभो सुहृज्जनं विशरणमाशु रक्षितुम्.
प्रमादतः प्रविशति पन्नगोदरं क्वतत्तनौ पशुपकुले सवात्सके विदन्नितं त्वमपि विवेशित प्रभो सुहृज्जनं विशरणमाशु रक्षितुम्. प्रमादतः प्रविशति पन्नगोदरं क्वदत्तनौ पशुपकुले सवात्सके विदन्निदं त्वमपि विवेशित प्रभो सुहृज्जनं विशरणमाशु रक्षितुम्.
प्रमादतः प्रविशति पन्नगोदरं क्वधत्तनौ पशुपकुले सवात्सके विदन्निदं त्वमपि विवेशित प्रभो सुहृज्जनं विशरणमाशु रक्षितुम्. प्रमादतः प्रविशति पन्नगोदरं क्वधत्तनौ पशुपकुले सवात्सके विदन्निदं त्वमपि विवेशित प्रभो सुहृज्जनं विशरणमाशु रक्षितुम्.
Answer 6. गलोधरे विपुलितवर्ष्मणा त्वया महोरगे लुटति निरुद्ध मारुते द्रुतं भवान् विदलितकण्ठमण्डलो विमोचयन् पशून् विनिर्ययौ. And Krishna goes in and then he starts growing, he starts becoming larger in size. So as Krishna then becomes larger in size, Aghasura also tries to grow up in size up to a particular point, but beyond a particular point, he's not able to grow. And then Krishna then is standing at his throat. So at that point, he chokes and then his air is not able to come out and then it goes out through the top of his head, right? Aghasura's pranavayu goes out to the top of his head. And then at that point, Krishna and the boys all come out and then the boys get rescued. Galodare vipulita varshmana tvaya, comma, mahorage lutati niruddha marute trutam bhavan vidalita kantha mandalo, comma, vimochayan pashupa pashun viniryayau. Galodhare vipulita varshmana tvaya mahorage lutathi niruddha marute drutam bhavan vidalita kantha mandalo vimochayan pashupa pashun viniryayau.
Galodare vipulitat varshmana tvaya mahorage luthati niruddha marute drutam bhavan vidalita kantha mandalo vimochayan pashun viniryayau. Galodare vipulita varshmana tvaya mahorage lutati niruddha marute drutam bhavan vidalita kantha mandalo vimochayan pashun viniryayau.
Galodare vipulita varshmanatvaya mahorage ludhati niruddha marute drudam bhavan vidalita kantha mandalo vimochayan pashuma pashun viniryayau. Galodare vipulita varshmanatvaya mahorage ludhati niruddha marute drudam bhavan vidalita kantha mandalo vimochayan pashupa pashun viniryayau.
Answer 7. Kshanam devet tvadupagamārtamastitam mahasura prabhava maho mahate vinirgate tvaitu nilina manjasa nabhastale nanruturato jagussuraha. So at that point, from the body of the python, when the pranavayu came out of his head, came out very shining light, which then, it says Bhagavatam, it was waiting for Krishna to come out of Aghasura's mouth. And when Krishna came out of Aghasura's mouth, it then went and merged in with the god, because the gods then all started praising and they all wanted to get rid of Aghasura. But they said, how is it if the Lord himself has gone into this person's body? How can he not be blessed? Right? So he then got liberated and then eventually merged into the Lord's body itself. Kshanam divi tvadupa-gamartam astitam. If you want to break it, or you can say it together. Tvadupa-gamartam astitam, comma, mahasura prabhavamaho maho mahate vinirgate tvai tu nilinam anjasa, comma, nabaha is there, put a is, nabas stale. So two is coming there. Nabas stale nandruturato jaguhu, put a is, jagussuraha. Kshanam devet tvadupagamārtamastitam mahasura prabhava maho mahate vinirgate tvaitu nilina manjasa nabhastale naruturato jagussuraha.
Kshanam devi tvadupagamārtamastitam mahasura prabhava maho mahat vinirgate tvaitu nilina manjasa nabhastale nanruturado jagussuraha. Kshanam devi tvadupagamārtamastitam mahasura prabhava maho mahat vinirgate tvaitu nilina manjasa nabhastale nanruturodho jagussuraha.
Kshanam divi tvadupagamārtamastitam mahasura prabhavamaho mahata vinirgade tvaitu nilina manjasa nabhastale nanraturadho jagussuraha. Kshanam devi tvadupagamārtamastitam mahasura prabhavamaho mahata vinirgate tvaitu nilina manjasa nabhastale nanraturadho jagussuraha.
Gopiji, that last line, nanruturato.
Nabhastale nanraturadho jagussuraha.
stanza 8. Savismaye kamala bhavadibhis suraihi anudrutastadanu gatah kumarakaihi dine punastaruna dashamupeyushi swakair bhavana tanuta bhojanotsavam. So when this happens, right, all the gods, like every other thing that happens, they're all like really amazed and they all come. So one interesting thing that happens is Brahma then comes to hear about this, and then he starts wondering, how is it that, he knows Krishna is Lord himself who has been born, but he doesn't know the potency of the birth that has happened. So he's also really astonished. How can this Krishna be so powerful in this birth, right? Yeah, I've not seen any of these things in any of the other incarnations before. And Brahma also is beginning to get surprised. And that's what is going to continue into the next chapter. So anyway, so now it becomes lunchtime, and then they all then decide to go to a picnic spot where they decide to have their lunch. Bhojanotsavam. They celebrate to have the picnic lunch. Sa Bismayehi is there, put a ich sound. Bismayeh Kamala Bhavadi. Kamala Bhavadi is referring to Brahma, one who has come from the lotus. So Kamala Bhavadi Bihi is there, put a is. Bhavadi bis Suraihi. And then a comma. Visarga and a comma. Next line, the Ra goes away. It becomes a Anudrutas Tadanu Gataha. Put a ich sound. Gatah Kumarakaihi. Dine Punas Taruna Dasham Upeyushi, comma. Swakair Bhavan Athanuta Bhojanotsavam. Savismaye Kamala Bhavadi Bhesuraihi Anudrutastadanu Gatah Kumarakaihi Dine Punastaruna Dashamupeyushi Swakair Bhavan Atanuta Bhojanotsavam.
Savismayaikamala bhavadibhih suraihi anudrutastadhanugatah kumarakaihi dine punastaranu dashamupeyushi swakair bhavana tanuta bhojanotsavam.
And to see the third line, Dasham Upeyushi.
Dasham. Okay. Savismayaikamala bhavadibhih Savismayaikamala bhavadibhih suraihi anudrutastadhanugatah kumarakaihi dine punastaranu dashamupeyushi swakair bhavana tanuta bhojanotsavam.
Savismakaih kamala bhavani bhisurehi Anudrutanustadanugatah kumarakaihi dine punastaruna dashamupeyushi swakair bhavana tanuta bhojanotsavam.
Third line, Gopiji, Anudrutas.
Dine punastaruna.
No, Savismay.
Second line or third line? Which?
The second line, Anudrutas Tadanu.
Anudrutas tadanu gatah kumarakaihi Savismakaih kamala bhava.
Savismayeh, ya, yeh.
Savismayeh kamala bhavadibhisureihi anudrutanustadanu.
No, again, you add an extra na there. Anudrutas.
Anudrutastadanu gatah kumarakaihi dine punastaruna dashamupeyushi swakair bhavana tanuta bhojanotsavam.
That's a 9. Bishanikamapi muralim nitambake niveshayan kabaladharah karambuje prahasayan kalavachanaih kumarakan bubhojitat tridashaganair mudhanutah. So now they come to this place and say, this is a good place for us to all to take a break. They were along the banks of Yamuna. So they said, okay, now the calves can also go take a break and drink water. So you then put, and some of these things will keep repeating in the next stanza, next chapter as well. So Murali refers to the flute, and then, Vishanikam is the horn, I said, right? The bugle, which they used to blow the horn and make a noise. and they put that in their waistband, and then they all start eating. And Karambuje, in your lotus like hands, you hold Kabala Daraha, you hold a ball of rice. So this word also will keep coming in multiple places later on. So you're holding a ball of rice in your hand, and then you're all sitting with your friends, and then Krishna is just talking joyfully and then having fun and talking and looking at this. The Tridasha Ganer, even the gods are also jealous. They're saying how lucky those Gopa boys are that Krishna is sitting with them, talking in a friendly, jovial manner, and then having the lunch together. Vishani Kamapi Muralim Nitambake, and then put a plus, Niveshayan Kabala Dharaha, put a ich sound, Kabala Dharah Karambuje, Prahasayan Kalavachanaihi, put a ich sound, Kalavachanaih Kumarakan, comma, Bhubhojita Tridasha Ganair Muda Nutaha. Vishanikamapim Muralim Nitambake Niveshayan Kabaladharah Karambuje Prahasayan Kalavachanaih Kumarakan Bubhojita Tridasha Ganair Mudanutaha.
Vishanikamaphi muralim nitambake niveshayan kabaladara karambuje prahasayan kalavachanaih kumarakan bubhojita tridashaganair mudhanutaha. Vishanikamaphi muralim nitambake niveshayan kabaladara karambuje prahasayan kalavachanaih kumarakan Bubhojita Tridashaganair Muda Nutaha.
Vishanikamaphi muralim nitambake niveshayan kabaladharah karambuje prahasayan kalavachanaih kumarakan bubhojita tridashaganer mudanutaha. Vishanikamaphi muralim nitambake niveshayan kabaladharah karambuje prahasayan kalavachanaih kumarakan bubhojita tridashaganer mudanutaha.
Last stanza. Sukhashanam tvihatava gopa mandale makhashanat priyamiva deva mandale itis tutastradashavarai jagatpathe marutpuri nilaya gadat prapahimam. So all the gods are discussing that Aghasura was just thinking about you, the Lord, and then he got liberated. Then there are people who are thinking about him all the time, they also get blessed. But somehow there are only very few people into whose heart the God himself is sitting. He says that's how the Gopa boys are blessed, that they're all sitting, and says all the offerings that the gods and everybody does as sacrificial offerings into the homam, he says all of those are superseded by the Sukhashanam, by the basic, the food that the boys, the Krishna is sharing with all the Gopa boys. He enjoys it more, and that's way more important to him than all the other sacrifices that everybody else does. So some of these things are very critical, because this stanza is such an important, nice stanza. It says it doesn't matter what you give, and the same thing we'll also discuss when we talk about Kuchelo Pakyanam, which will come in the 87th chapter, right? Is it doesn't matter the amount of offerings or the quality of offerings or what you give. It is just the love and the affection with which you do. That's what it is. Instead of doing all the great homams the God are discussing, we do all these things. None of that matter. He feels blessed. I think the happy meal for Krishna is when he's actually sitting with the Gopa boys and sharing the previous night's food, which they have all got, and sharing among themselves. Apdina, the gods are all discussing. So Marutpuri Nile, O Lord of Guruvayur, please eradicate all my ailments as well. Sukhashanam tviha tava Gopa mandale, comma, makhashanat priyamiva deva mandale iti stutas tridasha varair jagatpathe, comma, marutpuri nilaya gadat prapahimam. Sukhashanam tvihatava gopa mandale makhashanat priyamiva deva mandale iti stutas tridasha varair jagatpathe marutpuri nilaya gadat prapahimam.
सुकाशनं त्विह तव गोपमण्डले मकाशनात् प्रियमिव देवमण्डले इति स्तुतस्त्रिदशवरैर्जगत्पते मरुत्पुरी निलय गदात् प्रपाहि माम् सुकाशनं त्विह तव गोपमण्डले मकाशनात् प्रियमिव देवमण्डले इति स्तुतस्त्रिदशवरैर्जगत्पते मरुत्पुरी निलय गदात् प्रपाहि माम्
सुखासनं त्विह तव गोपमण्डले मखासनात् प्रियमिव देवमण्डले इति स्तुतस्त्रिदशवरैर्जगत्पते मरुत्पुरी निलय गदात् प्रपाहि माम् सुखासनं त्विह तव गोपमण्डले मखासनात् प्रियमिव देवमण्डले इति स्तुतस्त्रिदशवरैर्जगत्पते मरुत्पुरी निलय गदात् प्रपाहि माम्.
Shri Krishnaya Parabrahmane Namaha. We'll end the chapter here. Next is a very beautiful chapter, which is a continuation of this. So we'll cover that in the next class. Sandhranandhavabodhatmakamanupamitam कालधेशावदेभ्यां निर्मुक्तं नित्यमुक्तं निगमशतसहस्रेण निर्भास्यमानम् अस्पष्टं दृष्टमात्रे पुनरुरुपुरुषार्थात्मकं ब्रह्मतत्त्वं तत्तावद्भाति साक्षात् गुरुपवनपुरे हन्त भाग्यं जनानां कायेन वाचा मनसेन्द्रियैर्वा बुद्ध्यात्मना भा प्रकृते स्वभावात् करोमि यत् सकलं परस्मै नारायणायेति समर्पयामि. Thank you, everybody. See you next week.
Thank you, Rajesh.
Thank you, Rajesh.